That Taliban chocolate chip cookie got me. Wounded me right here on my nice clean suit that I brought out just for you guys. That Taliban chocolate chip dropped right there and got me. Thanks for having me. What a joy for a kid from South Carolina, just down I-85, Greenville, South Carolina. Whatever happened to I-85? Two-lane, nice little drive to Charlotte? That's as bad as the drive from Bagram, Afghanistan to Kabul. I expected roadside bombs and everything else going off. It's terrible. My goodness. But thanks for having me. I'm going to give you just a little insight. These guys are so kind to me. But please, chaplains aren't colonels. We're chaplains. Now, I love being a colonel on payday. I love being a colonel all the other times, but we're chaplains. We're chaplains because we want to meet and talk to people. One of the assumed roles of a military chaplain that we got from the British is when you're talking to a soldier, or sailor, or Marine, no matter what the rank is, you assume the rank of the person you're talking to. So when I sat in the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff's office with General Dunford, we just talked. He called me chaps, and I called him sir, or general, or chief. But we just talked. And so when you see a chaplain, honor him because he wants to just be a chaplain, all right? Like your pastor. He's just pastor. He's just whatever. So please, we just thank you so much for the privilege of being here today. Thank you for taking care of veterans. Thank you for your passion to take care of those who have gone before. We have upwards to 3.3 million men and women who are coming back from the field over the last 20-some years of the war on terror. And the check has yet to be written by our country on what the cost is for those things that are happening, and for your ministry to reflect to those people who are struggling, who have gone out in the street. You go to Colorado Springs outside the gate of Fort Carson, they say there's upwards to 8,000 veterans living homeless along the river in downtown Colorado Springs and up and along the Front Range. And so thank you for taking care of them. I believe America takes great care of their people. I really do. And I'm a firm believer in that, so thank you. I spent about 38 years in the military, the first 14 years in the Army. I got tired of being cold, wet, and hungry, and joined the Air Force. Much better life in the Air Force. Much better golf courses, much better chow halls, and a lot easier. So we're just going to talk about those things a little bit today as we get going. This is my secondary job here, working as Scope, because I enjoy doing a few things that I'm very passionate about. One of the things that, as the chaplain to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and as the chaplain over the United States Special Operations Command, where I was the lead chaplain responsible for 77,000 Navy SEALs, Green Berets, and Marine Raiders, Air Force Special Operations, it was a great way to end my career as a former Green Beret to come back and be able to impact those things. And some of those things that we learned in the Special Forces, we've implemented. One of the things that I found out at the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff's office is I had a reserve chaplain who actually was the head of the ethics department at the University of Florida. And together he said, George, we need to take this book, the Business Field Ethics Guide, which is the #1 ethics textbook in colleges and universities across the country, and we need to build it so that it's understandable and it's usable for military commanders, especially those in the special operations world, because they are living in the gray. And let me just say this about ethics. Ethics is not about right and wrong. We know what right is and we know what wrong is. Ethics are those decisions that are riding in the middle and you're not quite sure how to make the decision, whether it's right or wrong. And those are the things that we talk about. And so in the Business Field Ethics Guide, they did 5.5 years of research in which they found out that every ethical dilemma, or the vast majority that you will ever face in this world, are in one of 13 categories. You have them here in your sheet in front of you. And it's fun to talk about these because ethics and the ability to make ethical decisions is really a skill. It's a skill like if I were as an infantry soldier and I'm in a firefight and my weapon jams, without thinking, I know that I put the weapon on safe, I drop the magazine, I pull the charging handle to the rear, I check my chamber, I put the magazine back in, I release the charging handle, I put it on fire, and I go back to doing my business. When I jumped out of a perfectly good airplane 279 times, I knew that if after I counted to 3, if something didn't seem right, first thing I did was I checked my canopy. I knew that I pulled my risers apart. I knew how to twist. I knew how to go through my checklist. And the last thing on my checklist, if I'm spiraling down like this, is to pull my reserve. If you're a pilot, you know very well that there are what we call emergency procedures as pilots. You know that if you rotate and you take off, all of a sudden you ingest a bird into your engine, you know the first thing on your checklist is that you get more altitude. So you pull back on the yoke and you try to get as much altitude as you can so you can restart your engines, you can do whatever you need to do. And usually in the military, not so much civilian world, the last thing on the checklist in the military is bail out, bail out, bail out. It's interesting. Well, same thing with ethics. If you look at these different things you see here, how to stand up to power, how to intervene, how do you fix that ethical dilemma? I've taught this now to the board of directors at USA Insurance. I've taught it to Progressive Insurance. I've taught it to major corporations around the world. And I'd love to be able to share those things with you, but that's not necessarily why we're here today. I want to just talk a little bit about leadership in the short time that we have together. And I trust it'll be powerful. I trust it'll be challenging. I trust it'll be engaging. I trust that it'll keep you awake and you won't fall asleep drinking your water there and eating your Chick-fil-A cookie. Be careful for the Taliban cookie. It'll get you. People like those chewy, melty chocolate chips. Well, they'll get you. It's a pretty cool thing for a kid from Greenville, South Carolina, to have the experiences that we've been able to have in our life. Who could have planned that out except an almighty God? To take a kid from Greenville, South Carolina, and let him be the chaplain to 9 4-star generals. To have him write the religious doctrine for how our chaplain corps work around the world and how we engage with religious leaders around the world. You know, following the invasion of Iraq in 2003, the United States finally figured out that we're missing something in our national strategic policy. The United States and a couple of the Western nations in Europe forgot something very important. 87% of the world says we are religious. We are overtly religious. You cannot separate who we are as a country from our religion. Where we try to run from religion in America and separation of church and state, the rest of the world isn't there. And so we discarded religious leaders around the world instead of engaging with them. As an old battalion commander, man, who can help you in the area you're working? Religious leaders. We went into Iraq and we just marginalized the mullahs. You know how Saddam kept peace in his country? He paid off the mullahs. You know where the insurrection began in 2003? With the mullahs. You know how we ended the insurgency in Iraq in 2010? We paid off the mullahs, just like Saddam. Isn't it better if we engage with them in the beginning and say, hey, what are some things that we can come together on for peace in your country and engaging religious leaders? When you go to sub-Saharan Africa and there's a humanitarian crisis, the people that you need to deal with are Samaritan's Purse from this area, right? World Relief, Compassion International. Who's better to engage and make that connection than chaplains in the military and religious leaders? And so we wrote the national strategy for religious leader engagement, signed at the White House, the State Department now, that says the United States must engage religious leaders around the world. It's very important. And so don't be ashamed of the fact that you're a believer, a follower of Christ. Engage people because it's so important that we do those things. And so, as a kid from South Carolina, to be able to develop ethical training for all of our special operations commanders now that go through the United States Special Operations Command in Tampa. Every Navy SEAL commander, every Green Beret commander, every Ranger commander, every AFSOC commander, every Marine Corps Raider goes through training, and they learn these 13 battle drills that we talk about, how they can make better ethical decisions. We were able to introduce and begin training all our chaplains on moral injury, post-traumatic stress disorder, the difference between the two and why it's important to understand those things. And if you don't know those things, I would encourage you as Christian businessmen to understand those things because they're coming into your workspace. They're coming into your territory and they're struggling. And you need to know the difference between if they're struggling with post-traumatic stress issues or they're struggling with moral injury issues. And I think they're so important. And the basic skill is so simple. If they're dealing with trauma in their life, think post-traumatic stress. If they're thinking guilt in their life, like sins of omission or commission, things they should have done, didn't do, all those different things, think moral injury. And what a privilege to be able to teach military chaplains all around the world, to which I still do that, to train some 2,200 chaplains across the country for marketplace chaplains. It's a blessing to make sure that our people know that these people who are coming into the workplace, those people you're going to deal with in your work areas, they're dealing with trouble and struggles, and you should be able to engage them and know so that you can refer them to the churches and to the counselors and to the places that they need for help. So let's talk for a few minutes before our time is gone. Priorities. A 1 to N list. Anybody know what a 1 to N list is? Nobody does, because it's a government term. If you're in the Air Force, you're in the Army, you're in the government, a 1 to N list is basically a priority list. But on an Excel spreadsheet, it goes A, B, C, D, A, B, C, has it down your Excel spreadsheet. So number 1 is your number 1 priority. N, we call it a 1 to N list because in the government, that's about where you usually ran out of money. You ran out of money at N. And so on the Excel spreadsheet, you see your priorities and then all things, and then somewhere there's a red line across the middle and say that's where we run out of money and we get done. You see, as leaders, one of the most important things we do is we put priorities on those things that we need to accomplish. If you don't understand that, you're going to struggle as a leader, because this is the most important thing that I learned from serving 9 4-star generals. Leadership begins when you are able to synthesize essentials from non-essentials. The great 4-star generals who stand up in front of a briefing every day and they get briefed, and I've sat in the Pentagon, first thing that happens in the Pentagon at 7 o'clock in the morning, the Chairman, Joint Chiefs of Staff, someone stands up and he tells you where all the ballistic missile defense boats are in the world and what status they are protecting us from ballistic missile attack around the world. First thing they do. Second thing they talk about is he'll get an intel brief about everything else that's going on in the world. And he'll be getting all this information, and all these little guys like myself who stand up to do the briefing that day, we have all these notes, these copious amounts of things, and we're trying to kill them with PowerPoints. A great leader very quickly synthesizes the essentials from the non-essentials. And as a Christian businessman, as a leader within this community, the most important thing you can do for your workers and the people that you come in contact with is that you synthesize what is going to be the most important thing in your business. Let's see if we can break that down a little bit and learn a little bit more. Some of you might know this. Where's our veterans in here? We've got veterans in here. Thank you for serving. What did you serve? Marine Corps. Hoorah! Hoorah! I served the Commandant of the Marine Corps, was my boss, General Joe Dunford, as the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. My dad was a Marine officer. He never forgave me for joining a wimpy outfit like the Green Berets. To this day, he said, "You joined a wimpy outfit." Yeah. Were you, sir? Man, we got to have squids. Got to have the squids. Who's running all those ballistic defense boats all over the world? Got the squids. I believe our backbone of our defense is the Navy submarine force. I really do. I believe that. Any other veterans? Were there other veterans in here today? Anybody? Got one over here. Anybody else? Anybody else? Thank you for your service. I mean that. I really do. Do you understand that in America today, after Vietnam and Korea, 53% of Americans at some point in time had done government service and worn the cloth of their nation? Do you realize that today less than 0.5% of Americans will ever wear the uniform of this nation? 335 million people in this nation, less than 0.5% will ever be in the military. So thank you for being different and being willing to step aside and pledging to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. We appreciate that as well. Many years ago, I was a starving Christian school teacher. I made $8,000 a year. I drove the bus to school in the morning. I coached basketball and soccer. I made $400 extra for that. So I made $8,400 a year. No, that's wrong. I made $8,200 a year. My next year, I got a raise to $8,400 a year. Man, I thought I was living high in the hog. No. After about a year, I was $1,000 in debt, which seemed like a lot of money at the time in 1983. And I enlisted in the Army Reserve because that $120 a month seemed like a lot of money. Man, that was a car payment, That was my rent and my insurance. That was a lot. Well, I got on a plane one night as a 24-year-old old guy, landed in Columbia, South Carolina, at Fort Jackson, South Carolina in the middle of the night. Had a bunch of footprints. I was standing out there on the footprints. I was tired. Wasn't sure what's going to happen. And all of a sudden, Staff Sergeant Lawrence Langhorne showed up. Looked just like Lou Gossett Jr., an officer and a gentleman. He was so sharp, but he was scary. And they find the tallest person, the biggest person in basic training and make an example. You're lucky. You could blend in with the crowd. I couldn't blend in. Man, I was sticking out, and he made a beeline for me. Staff Sergeant Lawrence Langhorne. And I'm standing there, and all I felt was this brim of this hat go right above my Adam's apple. And his big brass drill sergeant thing right here. And Sergeant Langhorne. You're all mine, Larry Bird. For the next 8 weeks, Larry Bird, you're all mine. And then he said a few choice words that you used to be able to say when you're in the Army. I don't know if you can say that anymore. And he said, blankety blank, 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 blank. You're not Larry Bird, you're Big Bird. I qualify. He said, from now on, Big Bird, when I call you, I want you to flap your wings and cluck and say, moving, drill sergeant. So for 8 weeks, moving, drill sergeant, moving, drill sergeant, I was Big Bird. So after we got worked over pretty good, they gave us a little book called a smart book. You didn't have to be very smart to know what was in it. But in that smart book, you open up the first page, you saw this. General order number 1 is seared in my brain. I will guard everything within the limits of my post and leave my post only when properly relieved. That's it. The first thing the Army wanted me to know was they were going to put me somewhere and I was going to guard this place until someone came back to get me or I died. Or I starved to death, or turned into a skeleton or a pumpkin. I wasn't leaving this place, and they wanted me to know that because I will guard everything within the limits of my post. Let me stop right there. If you're a businessman, if you're a business leader, your number one responsibility, fiduciary responsibility, legally, is to guard everything within the limits of your post of your company. You're to make sure that it's running the way it should run. You're to make sure that your books are balanced. You're to make sure that your workers are paid and cared for. You're to make sure of all those things. You will guard everything within the limits of your post. It's so important that you realize that. First and foremost, we start with this fundamental issue that I will guard everything within the limits of my post. Let me break that down for another step. Dad, I will guard everything within the limits of my house. Mom, I will guard everything within the limits of my family. It's a simple principle that translates to so many different levels in this world, is that we will guard these things that God has entrusted to our care with everything that we have. It ought to be a burden that weighs on you and you feel it and you know it. Well, the second thing they teach you as an old infantry guy is they take you out and they put you and they say, dig a hole right here. And you go out about 45 degrees this way and you put a string around a tree or a little flag. And you go out about 45 degrees this way and you put a string around it. And this becomes the limits of my post. This is my firing section. This is the area that they put me in charge to guard, and I will guard everything within the limits of my post. Don't come into my area unless you're supposed to. Because this is what I got to defend in a very personal way. And I will stay here in this hole, and I will guard this area until they come to get me. Well, little Private Snuffy here, guarding his own little area, sometimes we get a little myopic. We get a little business that, this is just, This is boring. In the Civil War, at the Battle of Chickamauga, I believe, outside Chattanooga, those of you who are Civil War buffs, understand this. This isn't picking sides in the Civil War, it's just a historical fact. It was a rout of the Union forces by a numerically inferior Confederate force. You know why? In the middle of the Union line, someone decided it was time to move. And just by happenstance, just by a quirk of history, that's where the Confederates decided to do an attack, where someone had left the area that they were assigned to guard. And it rolled up the Union forces and they fled back to Chattanooga. What's it important? When you've been entrusted with something within the limits of your post, you need to realize that it's more than just you. You see, because if you step back a little bit, you learn that about 20 yards that way is another guy guarding everything within the limits of his post. And someone's guarding everything in the limits of his post. And he's counting on me to stand here and do my job. And the interesting thing about that is when we're all guarding everything within the limits of our post, when we're doing the job that God has entrusted us to do, we have synergistic things happen. In the military, we call those overlapping fields of fire. It's all about placing your soldiers in such a way that they can bring their guns to bear and they support each other. I love the fact that you're here today. Because you know what you're doing? You're being synergistic and you're having overlapping fields of fire. You're being introduced to another ministry that God has planted in this community and what they're doing, and you're becoming knowledgeable about that so that you can use the resources entrusted within your area to support this ministry, and vice versa. Because we sometimes forget that we are a part of something much larger than ourselves. We get so busy just trying to pay the bills. We get so busy trying to run our church. We get so busy trying to run our business that we forget that we're not the only game in town, and that there are other people who are relying on us, who are trusting on us to do what? Guard everything with limits of my post. Let's use that another way. Mission first, people always. That's thrown around a lot. And people say that, but do you mean it? You see, if you're guarding everything with limits to your post, you're realizing that that synergy comes from the people that are entrusting you to pay their salaries. Because their hopes and dreams and aspirations are built on you so they can buy a car, buy a house, send their kids to college, so that they can, in turn, do other things in the Lord's ministry. They're entrusting you to guard everything that God has entrusted to you. You're part of something much larger than yourself. General order number 1 doesn't seem like much, but it's foundational to everything that we do. God has entrusted you to something. How can I re-illustrate that? Let me do that a different way. I taught at the Air Force Academy for 3 years and wrote their character and leadership programs after the Air Force sent me to graduate school to study that. And we introduced servant leadership. We introduced a number of things that we teach around the country. And we love doing that. But in doing that, we learned some very important things. And we began a character and leadership program at the academy where freshmen do one thing, sophomores, juniors, seniors, and we're training them to become officers in the Air Force. Behind you, you see a plane that's not even in the Air Force, but I'll just use that for example. That's what? Anybody know what that is? It's an F-18. It's an F-18. You see a lot of things on there. You see air-to-air missile on the wings. You see a big tank underneath for fuel. Right to the right underneath the engine, you see a targeting pod. You see some laser-guided bombs. Lots of stuff on there. But those aren't the most important things on that plane. And it's not the pilot inside either. You see an intake for engines. Anybody know what this one is? It's an F-15. That's an F-15E Strike Eagle. And it's loaded for bear. It's ready to go business downtown, laser-guided bombs, air surface-to-air missiles, targeting pods, lots of stuff going on, but those two pilots up there, those aren't the most, well, yeah, I guess you got to have them to fly it, but as far as equipment on the plane, there's something very significant in that picture. You see planes take off all the time here. This big old plane, lots of wheels, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16 wheels, 4 engines, but it sticks out like a thumb to me, the most important thing on that aircraft. And this little arrow is not in the right place. It should be pointed to that little thing that's right below it. Everybody heard of a pitot tube before? Pitot tube. Very insignificant as you look at the plane. When you get on the plane next time over here at Charlotte, you go in the door, just look down here on the left and you'll see it. When you see the co-pilot walking around doing his walk around, he'll check the wheels, he'll check different stuff, but he'll go up to the pitot tube, and if he has to, he'll get a ladder, he'll look up and he'll look into it, he'll blow into it, because the pitot tube is what gives you your airspeed. You cannot fly an airplane if you don't know your airspeed. You don't know what flaps to set, you don't know how much weight, you got to know how much weight's on your aircraft. All these different things are determined by the airspeed of your aircraft. And we used the pitot tube of the Air Force Academy to train what we thought were very important leadership lessons. We talked about, first of all, we talked personal leadership as freshmen, how to be great followers, how to take care of yourself, get yourself to class, get dressed. Second year, we talked interpersonal leadership, how you take care of 1 or 2 other people in your squadron. Your third year, we taught them how to be team leaders, how to be the leaders within their squadron. And then the last year, organizational leaders, how to be the leaders within the cadet wing. But pitot became our motto because it's small, but it's essential. You're here today at this luncheon. And my question for you, and the challenge that's going to be coming today, is within the limits of your control, what's the one thing that's most important? What's the most important thing that really drives? Because remember, you're the leader, and the leaders have the ability to synthesize the essentials from the non-essentials. Is your essential, how big can I get the bottom line on my profit and loss statement? Is your essential, how many branch offices can I have? Is my essential, how much can I get in my 401k and get ready to retire, or build my business so I can sell my business? Is that the pitot tube in your life? Is that the most important thing? Is that what you've determined be the essence of what you do? Let's illustrate it another way. For those of you who are infantry people who know what this is the 81 millimeter mortar. It's the standard indirect fire weapon for a light infantry company. You say, what are mortars for? Well, there's a difference between direct fire and indirect fire. Direct fire is, if I see you, I can shoot you. Indirect fire is, I can't see you, but I can still kill you. Let's say there's a hill between me and you. Indirect fire means I know how to go up over the hill and come down and still kill you. So in an infantry company, the worst job in the infantry is to carry that. Because you got your weapon, you got your rucksack, you got extra ammo, but you got to carry this thing. And it comes in 3 pieces, so someone will take the eyepiece and the stand, and someone will take the tube. But the worst thing is that thing at the bottom, that metal thing. It's about this size. It weighs about 45 pounds. And it's the worst job because you're carrying all of your stuff, and now it goes in a canvas sack behind your back, and you've got to... By the way, did you catch that? Light infantry. That means I got to walk everywhere. 14 years. Took me a while to figure out, I don't like this job. I'm going to join the Air Force. This is not fun, carrying this. You know what? I'm a firm believer that everybody ought to have the opportunity in life to carry the base plate. Because you can understand That is no fun. You know what? I love the way you're saying yes, brother. Come on up here. Come on. You are now hired to be in the infantry. All right. There you go. Thank you. I like it. You know what? And we are equal opportunity. Holly Joe, come here. Holly Joe. I'm picking on Holly Joe because Holly grew up with me. She's one of my favorite, and I know that she works out. Her husband works out, and she is strong. So here you go, Holly. You can just hold it. Just hold it if you want to, or hold it by the hand, however you want to hold it. There you go. You know, I was reminded when I was a young Green Beret. I was in Honduras working for a guy by the name of Ollie North. You might have heard of that guy. And we went out on mission one night, and we loaded the helicopter off.
Wait, are you going to tell this whole story while I'm
Yeah, I am. And Major Charles Pickens, my commander, comes to me and says, LT, go get me the border base plate. And I go, why? He goes, the leader always carries the base plate. Oh, I like the way he thinks. The leader always carries the base plate. So understand this. So we started humping off into the woods. Just walk around, guys, humping in the woods. I like that. And after 2 or 3, 4 miles, the sergeant major goes up to the commander. He says, sir, I got that for a while. Another 2, 3 miles down the road, the master sergeant, he comes and he gets something. And then the sergeant first class. And then works its way down through the 12-man A-team, and pretty soon it gets to the Lieutenant Youstra. It's my turn. What was Charles Pickens teaching us? Share the load, share the responsibility. As the leader who's responsible for everything within the limits of your post, never expect your people to do something you wouldn't do yourself. And oh, by the way, he had already synthesized the essentials from the non-essentials, and he decided he was going to lead by example. And by the way, we just kept walking through the woods, and people got tired, so these guys are probably going to get tired, so there's probably a leader out here who probably ought to come carry the base plate and help them carry that for a little bit. There you go. Hoorah. Hoorah. You say, why are you saying that, George? Chappie. If you're synthesizing the essentials from the non-essentials in your life, what's important to you? People ask when I do this illustration, they go, well, George, what's the mortar base plate in your life? Excuse me, I could get emotional, may not, we'll see. I've seen and done a lot of things in life. One of the most difficult things I ever did was being the head chaplain in the largest combat theater hospital in Afghanistan. During my 7 months there, we had 3,800 wounded. We had 338 killed. And of those 338 killed, if you get tired, you can put it down, it's good. Of those 338 killed, I met every single one of them in the morgue so that my chaplains and chaplain assistants didn't have to go down there. And we had to clean those bodies to do those things. And when you come face to face with life and death, I'll tell you what my most important pedo tube, my general order number 1, the most important thing for me is I will never go anywhere, speak anywhere without sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ. I mean, I don't know why you're here, but the most important thing for me is that you would know, just like those soldiers that I met down in the morgue who went out on that day and they thought it was going to be a great day, they had no idea what the day would bring. And if they came to my chapel, I wanted to make sure they at least knew that there was an opportunity. I met every gun truck leaving Iraq in 2007. And those soldiers want you to come by and they want you to lay your hands on their gun truck and pray for their truck. And I would say, I'd rather pray for you. How are you doing? Where are you going to be if this truck blows up today and share the gospel with them. The most important lesson that I teach chaplains all over the country is, yes, I teach them suicide prevention, intervention, postvention. Yes, I teach them ethics training. Yes, I teach them all these things concerning, but the most important lesson that I make sure they understand is that the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord. The most important thing I want them to understand is that for all of us have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. All of us should know that God still commended his love towards us, that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. You say, well, how does that all end up, chaps? It ends up this way. If I confess with my mouth and believe in my heart that Jesus died and rose from the dead, I'd be saved. I don't think there's anything more important to our CBMC leaders, anything that if you don't know Christ today, that ought to be number one on your general order list. Where are you going to spend eternity? And then, once you solve that question in life, then we start looking at those priorities within the scope of your home. Does everybody know that? Within the scope of your business. Do you want yourself to be a person who can reach out to those people in an appropriate way? Those things are so important to us as chaplains, and it ought to be important to us as believers and followers of Christ. I tell you, it's not rocket science, but it's very simple. I hope you will start to understand, and there's a reason why these guys are standing here holding these things. And there's a reason why I like people to come up and take them and walk with them, is because I want you to feel the weight and the burden of the lives that God has entrusted to your care. Think about that. We have a sign on our refrigerator that says, the only earthly possession I will ever take to heaven are my children. That's my pedo too. Those people that I came in contact with today, you were my pedo too. It wasn't coming for free Chick-fil-A, which is cool. It wasn't coming up here to see all my new friends in Charlotte. It wasn't coming up here to tell you that the Clemson Tigers are the greatest football team that's ever lived. But it's to share this. Do you know when you close your last breath on this earth where you could go? People have asked me, George, were you afraid in combat? Not really. Not when people were firing at me. And by the way, I get real small when people are shooting at me when I was a Green Beret. My biggest fear is making sure that everything that I guard within the limits of my post are cared for and that they've come to know Jesus. And that's my prayer for you today too. So let's pray, and then someone's going to come forward. Father, thank you for this time that we could just gather. Lord, I enjoy teaching, and this is fun. But Lord, you are the most important thing in our life, and what we do with you is the most important decision we will ever make. I pray that you would be with each lady and gentleman that's in this room today, that as they lead, they'll start to process everything that's within the limits of their post, that they will promise between you that they will guard the ethics, they will guard the integrity, they will guard the spiritual domain, because you've entrusted them to guard this until you come home, till we die or you come and take us back to heaven. Lord, may we be faithful to that post you've given us. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you so much. Thank you. You're the best. I appreciate it.